Good. Well, thank you very much. Think you can make that work?
Sure.
Oh, good, good. Well, first of all, let me just tell you guys how happy I am that, not that I'm here, but that you're here. I mean, it's been lonely out there, and I really do appreciate the fact that you are here. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you a little bit of a background. I think they've extended my time a little bit since it was originally set up. But back in 1997, the Republicans were a majority at that time. I was on the Environment Public Works Committee. I ended up chairing that committee, but at that time, in 1997, I chaired the Clean Air Subcommittee. Now, if you'll remember, 1997, we were this close to actually ratifying the Kyoto Treaty. They were coming out with this. Then, of course, Clinton and Gore got in there, and Gore made his project. And so, for that period of time, for the 8 years following that, I was actually all alone on this issue. And that's why I say it's great to see you guys here, because you weren't around at that time, and I'll tell you, it was lonely. And you don't know how serious of a thing this has been. There are two reasons that politicians don't get involved in issues like this. And I was the only one out there doing it. And one reason is, this is where all the money is. The MoveOn.org, the George Soros, the Michael Moores. You might remember in the 2006 election, there's a guy named Richard Pombo, who was the chairman of the same committee in the House that I chaired in the Senate. And all the far-left environmental elitists from Hollywood decided they were going to defeat this guy. And they put $4 to $7 million in this House race in California against Richard Pombo in the last 5 weeks of the campaign, and they defeated him. And then I came up in 2008, and they said Inhofe will be the Richard Pombo of 2008. So, but I was ready for him, and I made sure that the people from Oklahoma were inoculated and knew that, that they didn't really want to have California determining who their next United States senator would be. Right, Morano? Where are you? Yeah, way back in the back. So anyway, that's one reason. The other reason is politicians generally just are not going to get involved in things where they can be made a fool of, where they can be lied about. It's so much easier just to do what everybody thinks is the thing to do. I used to take my interns down during a vote to the intersection when I was in the House of New Jersey and Independence. And I'd teach them so that they could look and tell who the liberals were just by looking at them when they go over to vote. And I said, I indoctrinated them. I said, there are three different things. First of all, the House of Representatives has 435 kingdoms, and there are 435 kings. Those are the members. And there are three different varieties. One, you have the far left extremists who think that government should have a greater involvement in our life. You have the far right extremists, like me, who feel that government is too involved in our lives. Then you have the largest group of the members of the House, and the same is true in the Senate, but I was in the House then, and they're called the mushy middle. Now, the goal in life for the mushy middle is to die in Washington, D.C. Okay, now, how do you die in Washington, D.C.? You stay there till you die. And so that's what they do, and that's the problem that you have. So you don't get these guys willing to take on the abuse that you take on when you take on the money of the MoveOn.org and the George Soros and the Michael Moores and all these people who pour money in campaigns. And I have, if there were time, I'd read this whole thing to you. But in trying to vilify me, they say no quantity of scientific evidence could sway the Republican from oil-rich Oklahoma from the central myth of his existence. And they start quoting me. Now, this is a good one because this is one of my favorites, and this is one of the earliest. With all the hysteria, all the fear, all the phony science, he said in 2003, could it be that man-made global warming is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people? And that was a statement that I didn't deny. Then they'd go on and talk about the fact that I drive Hummers. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm in Iraq and Afghanistan more than I've been in Humvees over there, but I've never driven a Hummer. I don't know where they got that. But they have all kinds of other quotes, which are the global warming, the most media-hyped environmental issue of all time, an unprecedented parade of environmental alarmists, and all of that. In fact, I have been called, and we made a list of this, dumb, crazy man, science buster, Holocaust denier, villain of the month, hate-filled, warmongering, Neanderthal, Genghis Khan, and Attila the Hun. Now, I'll tell you the problem with that. I've got 20 kids and grandkids, and they think it's great. So, and the last thing to go through, and they thought that it was some kind of an insult, but you know this big bash that the UN puts on every year to try to promote this thing with our dollars. One was in Milan, Italy, the last one I went to, and they actually had wanted posters with my face on every telephone pole in Milan, Italy. Well, let me get into this thing to say a couple of the real good. This story has a happy ending, and I'd like to share that with you now. First of all, you saw on the news that Claude Allegra was President Sarkozy's new outspoken climate change skeptic. He was going to be the super ministry of whatever they call it over there in France. And I was so proud to see that, because even though Dr. Claude Allegra is a far left extremist, he was the one who was walking the aisles with Al Gore a few years ago. Then he's a well-known scientist. In 2006, he came to the realization that the science isn't there. In Allegra, it was authored more than 100 scientific articles, written 11 books, and received numerous scientific awards and all of this. So anyway, he's one of the next one, the 700. Now, there are a lot of you guys in this room, people who have been on your program today, Linzen and Soon and all these, they're all heroes of mine. They were among the 700 scientists that we came out on my website, and write the website down because there's a lot more there than there will be time to talk about today. But we have over 700 of the prominent scientists. And I made a separate list of those who used to be on Al Gore's side of the issue. Claude Allegra is just such a person. Another one is David Bellamy of UK. He was on the other side of this thing, and he's come back, and you've seen some of the statements that he's made. And then, of course, you have in your group here so many of the good people that have been on your program. I'm just real proud they can all be in one location at a time. Let me do one thing. If we can figure this out, if technology is going to be here in this room today, and we can figure out how to operate it, I'd like to have you watch a very short thing on a few of the things that I've done on TV with Barbara Boxer, with some of these people, and you might enjoy what I've been up against. Uh-oh.
Oh, it's going to work.
No, this is really worth watching. Just stay with me here. Maybe you should stay. In fact, when you were cutting my guts out for 2 minutes last week, you smiled all the way through it, and I appreciate that.
Well,
and I wonder also, Miles, it wasn't long ago. You got to keep everyone hysterical all the time. You are the one that said another ice age is coming just 12 years ago.
I said that. I didn't say that.
You didn't say that? Let me quote that.
No. I'd be willing to tell you there are stories like that.
Let
but
me
there's not.
quote
There's
you.
not. I mean, we're
If
talking.
I quote you, so be accurate. I don't want to be inaccurate.
All right, go ahead.
You said, in talking about a shift that was coming, you said, if the Gulf Stream were to shift again, the British Isles could be engulfed in polar ice, and Europe's climate could become frigid. That's another scary story.
But that also is a potential outgrowth of global warming when you talk about the ocean currents being arrested. This is the day after tomorrow scenario.
A guy named Tom Wigley, you know who he is. He's the one that was the National Center for Science Research. Now, in the event that you're right and I'm wrong, let's say that it's due to man-made gases, anthropogenic gases, CO2 or methane. If that is true, if every developed nation signed up on the Kyoto Treaty and complied with it, it would only reduce the Earth's temperature by 6/100th of a degree in 50 years.
Now, we're not talking about Kyoto. We're just talking about whether global warming is real. And now the White House is promising action on global warming. We wonder what one of the leading contrarians on the issue is thinking. And so we invited him on the program. He joins us now from Capitol Hill, Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma. He is the top Republican on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, good to have you back on the program.
Hey, Miles, the last time I was on your program, I was the chairman. Not anymore.
Things change. Things change in an instant.
Yes, but they change back, too.
That's true, too. That is very true, and we're there to watch it every step of the way. Let's talk about the science first. James Hansen, one of the leading climate scientists, he says it's crystal clear. What do you say?
I say that that's James Hansen, who is paid $250,000 by the Heinz Foundation. I think he'd say almost anything you ask him to say.
To debate this issue, two outstanding members of the United States Senate, Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California. She's chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. And James Inhofe, Republican of Oklahoma, ranking minority member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, former chairman of that committee. Senator Inhofe, why are you so skeptical on this?
Well, you know, I wasn't at one time, Larry. 4 years ago when I became chairman of this committee, I was a believer that it was man-made gases were causing global warming, because that's all you saw in the media. Then when the Wharton School came out with the Wharton Econometric Survey, and it talked about how much this would destroy economically this country if we were to sign on to the Kyoto Treaty, which was in consideration at that time, and what it would cost. I'm talking about doubling the cost of energy and doubling the cost of gas. The average family, of the millions watching us right now, Larry, the average family of four, it would have been $2,750 a year. So I thought, let's look and make sure the science is right. Now, Larry, it's important to understand, I agree that we're going through a warming period right now. We were going through a warming period during the turn of the century. That lasted to 1945, then cooling to 1975, now warming till now, and they're guessing it's going to go into another cooling period in about 5 years. So why get hysterical? The same people who are hysterical about this, who had pictures of the poor polar bear standing on the last remaining ice cube, were the ones who were saying just a few years ago, another ice age is coming and we're all going to die.
Senator Boxer?
Well, I don't know who he's talking about saying that. And the 17,000...
Time magazine.
Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat of California. James Inhofe, Republican of Oklahoma. By the way, they are good friends.
That's it, isn't it? Oh, okay. That was it. What's happened recently that a lot of people are not aware of is all the polling has just reversed. For all these years, we've had only one side of this issue, and with the exception of Fox and talk radio, that's all you'd see on the networks and CNN, that it's man-made gases and all that. But the public now, in one of the more recent Gallup polls, show that it's getting much more skeptical, and all of it's the same. The Pew poll that came along, that was just a matter of a few weeks ago. They said that the global warming rated dead last among 20 voter concerns. This is what they asked. They asked the question, what concerns you as a voter? What are the major issues? And they started talking about that. At one time, global warming was always in the top 3. It's now dead last in 20, and that just came from a recent poll. The same thing. Now, if you're looking at just asking environmental concerns alone, not all other issues, you have a poll that Gallup did, and on just the environmental issues, according to their release, pollution of drinking water is America's #1 environmental concern, with 59% saying they're worried a great deal. Number 2 is the loss of the tropical rainforest, and way down at the very end, the very bottom, is global warming. So the truth is coming out. Rasmussen, only 4% blame humans for warming. It's the lowest that it's been before. So the polls are coming and showing pretty much that Gore's been wrong all this time. And one of the statements that came out of this Gallup poll was he sees no evidence that Al Gore's campaign against global warming is winning. It's just not caught on. They have failed. He has failed. Now, before you get too concerned about Al Gore, according to Bloomberg Press, he has accumulated from this issue in the last 7 years $100 million of personal wealth. So anyway, he'll be all right. Now, what are the liberals fixed to this thing? They changed the language. Let's don't use, global warming hasn't worked. Somehow it's just not catching on. Let's try something else. So you don't hear them ever saying global warming anymore. It's all climate change. And the language is supposed to reflect those changes. The American public has caught on. Unfortunately, the Democrats are a little bit behind. This is what I learned, you guys, that is, you can argue the science, and we have the scientists coming along. Those individuals who are on the other side of this issue have come over, and I can remember that we made a great discovery back during the Clinton-Gore White House years. Gore was trying to build his case, and he had a guy named Tom Wigley. He was with the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and he said, I need to have you do a study that's going to be documented and it cannot be refuted. That if all developed nations in the world were to sign on the Kyoto Treaty and live by its emissions, how much would it lower the temperature in 50 years? And they came out with the study results, and it was 7/100ths of 1 degree Celsius. Now, obviously, we found it. He didn't voluntarily give it to us. So the economic issue is the one that we've used. Now, this is how I work with members of Congress, because if you take, and with the public, if you take the last four, this is prior to this administration, the last four largest tax increases in history, this is what they were, starting with 1968, 1990, 90, and 1993. I remember being in Congress in 1993 when the Clinton-Gore tax increase, remember that? They increased everything: inheritance tax, marginal rates, income tax, corporate tax, capital gains tax, everything. And at that time, I went down to the floor. I remember so well. I was so outraged. I said, you know, I've got 20 kids and grandkids. This is a $30 billion tax increase. And then we look and compared that with, in the next slide, those are the first four. This is the tax increase in the Kyoto Protocol. Now, let's keep in mind, when you talk about the Kyoto, it doesn't make any difference whether you're talking about Kyoto or you're talking about McCain-Lieberman or Warner-Lieberman or Boxer, Sanders. It continues to be about the same. So this is the point that we were able to get by to get across to the public, and that is it's 10 times greater than the largest tax increase that we had had up to that time. Then you go state by state. It happens I'm a little bit more prejudiced when I talk about this issue in terms of the economy, because you see that the state of Oklahoma and the state of Texas are the largest tax increases. The EPA estimated that Lieberman and Warner would cost $983 billion by 2030, with a 44% increase in electric prices, and a gallon of gas would increase by 53 cents. The EPA estimated that Lieberman and Warner would cost $983 billion by 2030, and all the same Congressional Budget Office would have created a $1.2 trillion new government spending program. Energy Information Agency, which is independent, said it would actually deteriorate our manufacturing base by some 9.5%. Now, when you look at them all, the numbers are so consistent as to what it would cost that I tried something different. Today's an anniversary. Anyone know what this anniversary is today? 1 year ago, what happened today? You guys don't know? That was when we defeated Warner Lieberman. 1 year ago today. I thought that's why you're having it right now. But in doing this, knowing that I would have to carry the opposition to Barbara Boxer, I did something, and this is just, I know that you've had the scientists on here, people ought to be listening to them, but you win this debate with the economics. And so at the very opening statement of this debate that we're having on the floor of the United States Senate, I said to Barbara Boxer, I said, I'll tell you what, I don't believe the science is there. The science, in my opinion, is not there, but let's assume it is. I'll concede the science for the debate of this bill. Let's assume that the science is there, which totally disarmed her because everything she was using was going to be on science, and we won it in a real big way. Sometimes we're kind of bailout oriented now, and I think we need to let the public know, and we have successfully done that with all these bailouts, and by the way, the bank bailout, and this is a little bit, you didn't pay for this, but I have to share this with you. I think sometime in the not too distant future, we'll look back and say probably the most onerous vote ever cast by the United States Senate was a $700 billion bailout bill, which gave an unelected bureaucrat $700 billion to do with what he wants. Now we find out that it wasn't Paulson, it was Geithner who was behind the thing all that time. Now with all these bailouts, just like today's bailout, where's that money? That's what they voted on, not me, but they voted on giving that unelected bureaucrat $700 billion. That's not on this program, but nonetheless, that's part of it. Climate bailout, $6 trillion by comparison. So let's assume for a moment that we said that we bought into the argument that man-made anthropogenic gases are causing global warming, and what do you want to do about it? Cap and trade is what they have to use and what they are using, but look at some of the strongest supporters of doing something about global warming, and that the number one would be James Hansen. Remember just a minute ago, we're on TV, and I said he'd go along with anything. He got $250,000 from the Heinz Foundation. Well, even him, read what he said about that. Cap and trade is a temple of doom. And it's, so we have even these individuals on our side. Ralph Nader, that great American Ralph Nader, he said he said the reason that he's against cap and trade, he said we ought to have a carbon tax. Let me say, I've said publicly, if you're going to do something, go ahead and have a carbon tax, because then the American people will know this is a tax increase. The whole reason for cap and trade is to disguise the fact that it is a tax increase. And they've done a very clever job of making some groups, or a lot of groups, think that they're big winners. The wheat growers of America bought into it for a period of time. Somehow they thought that they were going to be big winners. Well, this is probably the only time in my political career I've agreed with Ralph Nader. That is where, and the same thing is true with James Lovelock. You know all about him. He was a very famous liberal and environmentalist. And then my good friend, Mitch Daniels of the state of Indiana, he gave a great speech, or op-ed. Was that an op-ed piece? I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, you need to get that and read it, because he's really come out, he's being very courageous on this issue. So let me just tell you what I think. I'm right on schedule here. I want to wind this up, and I want to tell you what's going to happen from this point forward, in my opinion. First of all, the House will pass anything. Nancy Pelosi has the votes to pass anything. Don't be distressed when you see the House passes some kind of a cap and trade bill, and it's, you know, it could be worse, and she could still pass it. So it'll pass there. The EPA has threatened to regulate this through the Clean Air Act. That isn't going to work, in my opinion, because we can stall that until we get a different president, and that shouldn't be a problem. But while the House will pass a bill, and I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions here, because some of you may not agree with this. In the Senate, they're not going to be able to pass it. You guys, it's just not going to happen. Now, we have a history of what's happened in the Senate. We had the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. Remember, that's when we passed by a 94 to 1, I think it was, saying that we don't want to ratify any treaty, and the Senate does that doesn't include developing nations with developed nations. Well, that stuck with us, and yet with very popular people like McCain and Lieberman coming up in 03 and then again in 05, the reason I'm going to tell you that they don't have the votes, it's not going to pass, is that in 05, that's when I was on the floor for 8 hours a day, 5 days, or about 10 hours a day, about 50 hours. And at that time, only 2 senators would come to the floor to help me with this, because I was taking on McCain and Lieberman on this silly issue. And you fast forward to 1 year ago today, 2008, the Warner-Lieberman, it didn't take 5 days, it took 2 days to defeat it. 23 senators came down to help me on this issue. As I told Barbara Boxer, you know, get over it, get a life. You've lost, we won. And right now in the Senate, so while it will pass in the House, in the Senate it will not pass. Her latest vote count, and she won't admit this, but it's 34 votes. It takes 60 votes in the Senate. Maybe the people who wrote our Constitution knew what they were talking about after all. But anyway, that's not going to be something that is going to happen. And lastly, the CBO, global warming legislation. If you, it talks even CBO now, and this is Peter Orszag, which is our new president's CBO director, has said that giving away allowances could yield windfall profits for the producers that received them, effectively transferring income from consumers to firms, owners, and shareholders. All of the evidence suggests that what would occur is that corporate profits would increase by approximately the value of the permits. That's Peter Orszag. That's not me. So I think we are in much better shape than may have thought. I'll end with this, and this was, you had Richard Lindzen on this morning. Did you have Richard Lindzen? And, oh, he's here. Where, hold your hand up, Richard. You're my hero. I have to know where there you are. Okay. This is one of his, this is not my favorite quote of yours, Richard. The favorite one is the one about Al Gore. Did you use that this morning? Yes. Oh, okay. Make a note of that. Anyway, Richard, you're still my hero. So I would just say this, that all we have to do now is just show the cost to the American consumer. We are winning, keep the same trend going that's going right now. And I have a website, www.inhofe.senate.gov, and you'll find a lot more stuff there than you really than you probably really want. And why am I so interested in all this? These are my 20 kids and grandkids, and that's the reason why. Now, with that, we'll just open it up to any questions you guys might have. Yes. Oh, yes. This guy right here, wasn't he? You're speaking after me, aren't you? Yes, sir. Oh, I got him warmed up. Okay, go ahead. No, you'll love Lord Christopher here at Moncton.
Now, my big question, sir, is this. Are you really sure that it's going to be as bad for Barbara Boxer in the Senate as you say? Because the powers of government, nine votes, even the Senate, are pretty big. Yeah. Are you being a little too sanguine?
The reason I think not is because a year ago today we went through the same thing. Oh, his question was, am I really that confident that Barbara Boxer won't have more than those votes? And the reason, and because of the money, they're able to, buy people off and all this stuff. The reason I am is because I went through this thing a year ago today, and at that time the same thing was true, and they were talking about what was going to happen, where the votes were, and here's the surprise, and this is something that even you don't know, Lord Moncton, and that is that we have about 4 new Democrats that were elected in the last election. They expected them to be lockstep. One of them is Begich up in Alaska, who defeated Ted Stevens. He's a real smart guy. He's one I went to when our new president, Obama, came out with this tax on oil and gas, 8 tax increases that would put our oil and gas producers out of business. And I went to him, and he's now co-sponsoring a letter with me to the administration with Democrat signatures and Republican signatures saying we're going to oppose all 8 of those. And by the way, also greenhouse gas or the global warming thing. So we have the numbers.
You got one
Yes,
over
sir.
there.
Yes, sir. Oh, well, the question was, he didn't catch why I said that the EPA would not regulate under the Clean Air Act. And the reason I don't believe sure, they would try, but for 2 reasons. Number one, Obama knows that this is going to be something that is going to be a huge cost to the public, and the public's going to find out. He does not want to have that, and if it's done through the Clean Air Act, that's all the administration. That's not Congress. Now he could say, if it's passed in Congress, they did it, I didn't do it. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is that the way it's set up under the Clean Air Act, we have a thing called the Congressional Review Act, CRA, that allows me, as a member of the United States Senate, to say this is something that is going to have harmful effects, therefore we want to have the congressional review on it. Then they're going to file a lawsuit. It'd be 5 years before they came out with anything that they could actually effectively do with the Clean Air Act. So it's called the same stall routine that the liberals have been doing against us by filing lawsuits against the EPA and all that on behalf of Greenpeace and those groups. We can do the same thing to them. Yes, sir.
Senator, we have a question back here. Senator, back here, we have a question.
Senator, I'm glad to hear your positive feeling about the coming defeat of cap and tax in the Senate, that it won't pass. But at the same time, I think we need to remember that in politics, things happen unexpectedly. There could be a huge heat wave. We could have 200 people die the week that the vote will come up. The arm twisting, the amount of money that Obama can put into districts directly and indirectly, there are a lot of uncertainties here. And I think it would be a mistake if we sit back and say, well, we don't have to worry now. We can back off the pressure. We don't have to continue the fight and the educational effort. We really need to keep that up because we never know what may actually turn out.
Let's keep in mind, I had a qualifier. I said with the same trends that we're experiencing right now, it will not happen. Now, we can't anticipate that we'll have the same trends. Every one of you guys, and any power bases you have, any work that you do, you got to continue, because if you don't continue, we'll lose this momentum that has turned, and you're exactly right. I don't talk about the fact that it's a done deal, because I know things can change. I'm saying that I'm just thankful there are people like you out there who would join people like me and coming all the way across from England and up from Australia and other places to be with us today to expose this thing for what it is and keep this trend going.
Senator, we have one final question right over here.
If nothing is done for Obama's administration to go to Copenhagen this December, what will happen in Copenhagen?
Well, of course, he's going to try to have it carry some kind of a victory to Copenhagen. I don't know what that victory would be. Perhaps they could put off the House vote until that time so they could go there with a House vote saying, look, victory is out there somewhere. We're going to be able to do something with it. So he has to take something to Copenhagen. I can tell you I don't believe it's going to be from the Senate, but if it's nothing more than, well, we're going to show them we are hereby committed to use the regulations under the Clean Air Act or something like that. So I think that if he'll create something favorable to take to Copenhagen. And by the way, all these, I know this will come across as perhaps a little extreme. I have to wonder what has happened to sovereignty in America. I see all these things that are happening with the Law of the Sea Treaty and all these things that come from the United Nations. And this thing, if you think back to where this really started, the ICCC was just a product of the United Nations. Of course, the NAS went along. The stuff you read out of the NAS, as Lord Monckton knows, is not from the scientists, it's from the policymakers. And so that stuff has come out. And I have a group in the Senate I'm very proud of. Every time the UN comes up with something that I think is not in the best interest of the United States, we can pass a resolution in the Senate that says, unless you reverse this position as a multinational force, we're going to withhold 25% of our funding for the United Nations. This infuriates them every time we do this. They would love to have some global tax to allow them to operate and not be accountable to the United States of America, to the British, or to anyone else. And what easier way is that than to have some kind of a global tax on this issue? I've always suspected in my mind that was a lot of the motivation for when it started in the very beginning. I forgot what your question is, but that's the answer. All right. You guys, thank you very much for what you're doing. I'm very proud of you.